Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to just briefly comment on the King's speech today, what it is, what it contained in general terms, and if Labour made the right decisions on what they included. So for those not really up with parliamentary procedures, the King's speech opens a parliamentary session. Although MPs have been holding little debates in the House of Commons over the last week, they've not been able to do any actual legislating before Parliament was formally in session. The King's speech is written by the government. It sets out the legislation that they want to pass for the following session and then basically opens Parliament. Not that a session of Parliament's the same as an actual Parliament member. There will be multiple sessions of Parliament before the next general election. This is the first one of this Labour government, and so the King's speech contains the legislation that they want to get out of the gate first. Now, there were things not included in the King's speech which were in the manifesto, which gets people going, oh, are they dropping that now? No, there are a few things to note here. First, there's only so much parliamentary time. This is what I keep saying about people who say, oh, they should do this, they should do this, they should do this. If you're talking about legislation, that means parliamentary time. If you want to use parliamentary time for one thing, you're not using it for another. I get how people have looked at how Parliament's behaved recently and gone, well, they've got loads of time. Yeah, they're not going to now. You know, so the first thing is you have to prioritise which bills you put before Parliament first. Second, although the government gets to eat up the lion's share of parliamentary time, they don't get it all. Others get to use some as well. Third, there are absolutely loads of bills in this King's speech. Might be a record, I don't know. But, you know, and yes, not all bills are the same in terms of the time it will take to pass through Parliament. So you can't just judge one bill as like being equal to another. But there are like 38 bills in this King's speech. Now, for reference, when the Tories came to power in 2010, there were 24. In 1997, when Labour last came to power, there were 22. So even given the fact that some bills are beefier than others, we've got a huge legislative programme there. And if you really want, if you want a recent comparison, the last King's speech, which was written by Rishi Sunak, there were 7 bills. And some of those were left over from the previous session. And he didn't even get all those through. So yeah, MPs are going to be a bit busy. One of the key points of interest over the last session of Parliament was, as I say, MPs just finished early a lot. This was despite Sunak saying he had these grand plans. Well, to say he had all these grand plans, he wasn't really giving MPs much work to do, was he? In fact, if you take the Rwanda plan out, which he should have done from the start, there really wasn't a lot left. And what there was often got chopped, like renters' rights. So this is a big legislative timetable, but is it the right one? Well, if you've just won power after 14 years in opposition, you expect a major programme of reforms. But which ones to do first? Well, for my money, there are quite a few criteria. You could probably string it out to 10 if you want to, but I think there are 3 notable ones. The first is prioritising bills which can produce instant benefits that people can feel, or if not instant, at least will produce them quickly. That is important for a change government. The second priority is sort of the opposite. Prioritise bills which take the longest to come to fruition. Like if, for example, you pass some legislation, but once the legislation's passed, the effects could still take another 2 or 3 years. So maybe it's something to stimulate economic growth, for example, but you're not going to get those results for about 3 years. You don't pass the legislation with only 2 years to go before the election, or you don't get the benefit. In fact, it's quite normal for longer term action to be taken early in the parliamentary cycle and more short term action later on. It's all about getting the best bang for your buck at the following election. And the third would be controversial legislation. There are some policies that a government firmly believes are the right policy, but maybe there are fears that people think it's risky or comes with certain downsides, which may not actually be true. So you do it early, you've got the public giving you the benefit of the doubt, and the sooner you show that the criticisms are unfounded, the better. So what bills were in the King's speech? I'm not going to go over all 38, obviously. Pointless would take forever. But we can pick a few out. See, my favourite is the Water Special Measures Bill. Now, the reason it's my favourite is not just because, you know, the cleanliness of our water is terribly important. It's because if I pick out my favourite line from it, strengthen regulation to ensure water bosses face, and this is in bold, personal criminal liability for law breaking. The reason this is my favourite is because it can be used in so many other cases later on as well, this general policy. Absolutely essential. If you've got a situation like our privatised monopolies of public services, you have to have personal consequences for the executives making the decisions for the company. You know, it's too easy to make a decision that's in the interests of the shareholders, and then nothing happens to the company. It gets fined, nothing happens. So this will be a bill that shows a real difference between the two governments. It will result in fairly quick changes, although it will also result in longer term change. I think the desired results of cleaner waters would therefore take a few years to, if you'll pardon the expression, filter through. But it is the ideal sort of bill to go with early. The Railways Bill is also one which absolutely needed to be early, because part of the legislation is taking over private contracts of railway companies as they expire. Well, one expires this autumn, so they have to do this one immediately. I think one of the most hotly anticipated and potentially feared by the Tories is the Employment Rights Bill. Once passed, this will instantly boost workers' rights, especially those in the most vulnerable forms of employment, as well as ban some extremely shady business practices. It cancels out the last government's anti-union laws and policies as well. It's an example of a bill which will mean a big improvement to some workers immediately, but others, those in more secure employment or working for well-run businesses, will see benefits later on. Because like I say, a lot of the reason for the need for these is it helps good businesses as well, because the good businesses already have good business practice and already treat their workers well. So they have been put at a disadvantage by allowing bad business practices. So this helps everyone. But it also brings forward short and long-term benefits. Same with the Renters' Rights Bill, really. It's going to give renters greater peace of mind. The most immediate help will be to those who feel they're under threat of something like no-fault eviction or other stressful practices. Because the majority, the bill says this as well, the blurb to the bill, I should say, or the blurb to the King's Speech, rather. The majority of landlords are fine. Every landlord I've ever had was really good. I've never had a problem with the landlord. You can argue the majority of renters, therefore, are not going to see immediate benefit to themselves because their landlords are fine. But once passed, as a renter, you'd hopefully feel, because, you are in that very insecure home environment. And your home should be a safe place. So they feel less stressed about ending up with a bad landlord in the future. What wasn't included, so if you're talking about things, okay, so these are the things that were in. That's just a small smattering. What wasn't? So one notable one for some people, myself included, would be votes for 16-year-olds. Now, it would have been nice to see this in place for the local elections next year. But that being said, what would you knock out to include it? Like I say, there's only so much parliamentary time possible. This King's Speech is huge when compared to others over the past few decades at least. It's an example of something which can wait. After all, the manifesto is intended to be delivered over an entire parliament. So obviously, there are going to be things that are delivered first, some sort of in the middle, and then some in the final session before the election. And that's without taking account of the fact that unexpected events will crop up to eat into parliamentary time. In the aftermath of the 2019 general election, Boris Johnson's government did not have COVID or a Russian invasion of Ukraine in their sights, but it still happened and it still took up a lot of parliamentary time. And the decade is only just middle-aged. There is still time for the invasion of the space monkeys. Of course, there will be some who will say, well, this bill could have made way for that one, in the King's Speech. And, some bills are clearly of benefits to millions, if not tens of millions, and therefore no one's going to say we should have knocked that out. Others are more niche, so there will always be some who think they're more important than others. There are bills that I would have placed lower priority, like, for example, the Football Governance Bill. But it's also probably fair to say that this will be more popular with more voters and also takes longer to bed in. Once you legislate for votes for 16-year-olds, it's basically done. There'll be a little bit of change in the administration. It's done. It's finished. You don't really have to do much else. It's then for people who administrate elections to deal with it. Whereas something like the Football Governance Bill, so you need the legislation passing, but once it's passed, nothing actually happens, because then what you have to do is implement it. So it's one of those bits of legislation that does nothing once it's passed, other than means you then have to put some systems in place, but you don't get the desired results until those systems are in place. That could take another year or two, couldn't it? So it will be thinking like that which inform the decisions on which bills to push first. This is not a King's Speech which anyone can credibly say, oh, there's not much in that, is there? It's unlike Sunak's version last year. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.